Hello and welcome to my house and our house. I couldn't think of a better place to offer this message of a little bit of the backstory of how Sacred Art of Living Center got started. For more than 20 years, this was the place where Mary and I not only entertained family and friends, but also incubated so much of what became the courses of Sacred Art of Living Center. Healing the healers, the sacred art of living and dying, the soul and science of caregiving, honoring our ancestors. That's all been part of the work of the last 25 years. But I wanted to take this opportunity on our 25th anniversary to tell you a little bit of the backstory of how that whole vision got launched and started in the first place. After working in hospice for quite a number of years, Mary as a bereavement counselor and educator, myself as spiritual caregiver and executive director, we decided it was time to take a sabbatical. The work was intense, and we also felt a sense of urgency to take what we had been doing and step back from it and really see how the next generation of the work could best continue and also be healthy for ourselves in the intensity of day-to-day caregiving for the dying. So we had arranged to take a year sabbatical, and part of what we wanted to do during that time was to travel to places in Europe and North Africa where the sacred art of living and dying tradition got started 1,000 years ago. And that's what we did. But we had planned it so that at the end of that period of time, we would have a retreat experience, a pilgrimage really. And we chose the island of Iona as our choice. We found a little croft house there, and the two of us spent about 10 days just enjoying the beauty of that place and really drinking in the great spiritual energy of the story of Iona. And that's the story I'd like to tell you about, because it was really during that time, with the help and the guide of a brilliant woman who was a great Celtic teacher and also spiritual director, that we had some time alone to be able to rest and imagine how the next generation of our work was going to go. Now, if you've ever been to Iona, it's a really tiny island in the Outer Hebrides. It's so small that really in a few hours you could walk around the entire circumference of the island. But that's not really why people go to Iona. They've been going there for centuries, perhaps for millennium, because of its history, its lore, and it is considered today in the Celtic spiritual tradition a thin place. I didn't know when we first went to Iona that it was an outcropping of some of the oldest rock on the face of the earth. In some ways, when you're on Iona, you're feeling the vibrations of the Big Bang, they would say. It's also the place where, according to legend, in the 6th century, St. Columba arrived with a group of 12 friends from Northern Ireland to create a community which eventually would influence the history of Celtic Christianity in the entire world. It was out of the Iona community that eventually the great manuscripting tradition produced the Book of Kells. And Columba himself was an amazing spiritual seeker. He had a foot in the old world of the bards, and yet he was also interested in being a bridge to the newly arriving European spiritual tradition. So in his small cork boat, he arrived and eventually, over the rest of his life, created a community which exists there to this day. It was out of the energy and spirit of the modern Iona community that Mary and I were held during our retreat time. And we were told ultimately to take 3 hermitage days and to go to different places on the island. Mary went to Dunny, a traditional hilltop which has a lot of connection to the lore of St. Bridget. And I went to the southern part of the island to the Nach na Engel, the Hill of the Angels, where Columba had allegedly received his visions. During our 3-day vision quest, I just took a writing journal with me. And as I typically do, wrote lots of verses and lots of ideas. Mary, on the other hand, tended to work on the other side of the brain. She took her paintbrushes and some art paper and made lots of sketches and created mandalas. She's always been more attracted to creating ceramics and artistic expressions of what's going on inside of her soul. Back and forth over a period of 3 days, our spiritual guide said, I only want you to do 3 things. Listen, don't think too much, and see each day if there's a word or a phrase that shows up. And then we'll come together, and on the 3rd day we'll meet down at the Bay of St. Columba, and we'll see what's happened. So that's what we did. And on the 3rd day, Mary brought her small list and I brought mine. My list of words were sacred, dying, and no regrets, because it was really important for me to look forward to the next generation of my professional work and life and not leave something behind that I was going to regret. I also wanted to make sure that whatever it was I was going to do would nurture my most important relationships, including that with Mary. She brought her list, and at the top of it was art, living, and the 3rd phrase that she brought was no regrets, independent of each other. Our guide was delighted and led us down to the shore where Columba's boat had landed some 1,500 years ago. And she told us the tradition of the stones that were unique to that place, that are collected really by people who arrive all over the world, called mermaid tears. Some people also call them Columba tears. I have one here. When Mary and I had each picked up and identified this beautiful green marble stone, our spiritual guide had us go out into the water and to wade up really to our waist, and the water was very, very cold. She did a little blessing, and she asked us to take one of the stones and to cast it into the waters of the Atlantic. And the other stone we were to hold close to our hearts. So that's what we did. And she told us, you've now been given something that you need to trust. In Celtic tradition, the name that's given for a soul friend, a spiritual companion, is a beautiful term, Anamkara. And she told us, here in this thin place, the island of Iona herself is the Anamkara. And she has spoken to you across the ages, and you need now to trust the whispers of her wisdom. She said, keep that other stone. When you're tempted to be discouraged by all of the human things that will happen as you move forward into the next chapter of life, hang on to that stone as a touchstone of this time and trust this vision. Well, eventually, when you put the 2 words together, the 2 groups of words, you get the sacred art of living center. You get the sacred art of living and dying. And you get, underneath it all, this important refrain that for Mary and I was so important, no regrets. Many of you know that some years into our work, Mary was diagnosed with cancer. And she lived with that cancer for about 10 years. What a lot of people don't know is that towards the very end of her life, within the last hour, she came out of a deep coma sleep. And she called me over, and the last words that she spoke and whispered into my ears were, honey, no regrets. I took her stone from Iona, and I put it with her ashes, and they were buried. And I still have my stone today. And after 25 years, it is a powerful reminder to me about a vision that was given to us, about continuing a kind of work that I guess is unique. It's threshold work. It's work that puts us at the threshold of life and death. It's work that helps us know how to support people and hold them in love during times of grief and loss. There's a couple of final reflections I'd like to end this with that perhaps could be an inspiration for you. One is a piece of an old Irish poem. Death breaks an earthly tie, but love survives. When grief has passed, for love can never die. It is truly as simple and as profound as that. Only by grieving can we see death not as a separation, but as the ultimate continuation. Each of us has times in our lives, perhaps it's an anniversary time, perhaps there's another moment when the soul is urging us to do what Frederick Buechner said, to find that place that God is calling to you, which is the place where your deep gladness and the world's hunger meet. Whenever any of us follows that North Star, it's not a guarantee that there won't be challenges or pain or loss or suffering or tears, but it is a guarantee that something larger carries us in the language of Iona beyond the ninth wave, which is the wave symbolically and mystically of eternity. When you throw just a pebble in the water, even of the ocean, it begins to create ripples, and those ripples will go on forever. And you might be surprised at how many persons those ripples will ultimately affect. I'd like to make a special appeal on this, our 25th silver anniversary. Like so many of you who have been impacted by COVID, so too has our work at Sacred Art of Living Center. It has taken monumental effort, energy, and resources to shift all of our teaching to online courses. It's required buying expensive video and electronic equipment, but we're committed to making sure that in spite of these things that we're all facing right now, this important work continues. People around the world continue to deal with suffering, aging, spiritual pain, death, dying, and grief. We want to be there as a resource for them. Will you please make a contribution to this year's annual campaign? Consider going to our website now. You'll find all the information there about how to make a contribution. And this year, if you do make a contribution of $50 or more, we're going to link you to a series of specially designed and recorded guided visualizations that will be a support to you during the upcoming holiday season and in the months ahead as we continue to pass through the dark night of this pandemic. It's our gift to you and to those you love. Thank you for being generous.